So we're starting a little bit late. My apologies for that. My name is Jeff Fritz, and today we are talking about beyond the basics, building components with Blazor, for Blazor, in Blazor, with the Blazor. I don't know, something like that. I'm a principal program manager on the Microsoft.net team. I'm a Twitch partner. I'm a YouTube partner. You can find me on all the social medias. I am C# Fritz out there. All right. I'm going to keep the I'm trying to keep the chat open here so that I can see if there's anything that comes up, and I can see if anybody does a hand raise here. And there it is. Okay. So please, as I'm going along, I've got a handful of demos to show you. I have some content to talk through. As I'm going through, if you have questions, please drop them in chat. I'll be keeping an eye on chat, and when I've got a good place to pause, I'll pause, answer your questions, dig into the demos a little bit. Please interrupt me, ask questions. This isn't about me talking to you. This is about us having a conversation and you getting more out of this than just listening into another Fritz talk. All right. So let's talk about beyond the basics, building a little bit more with Blazor. And let's start off. Let's do some level setting out the gate. Blazor in 60 seconds. It's the next generation component-based user interface framework built with C# and Razor that runs on ASP.NET Core, on the server, or in the browser with WebAssembly. And with the enhancements that have been delivered with .NET 5, you're going to find that WebAssembly with Blazor is a really good experience. It runs really fast. It's not something that somebody's going to look to and say, gosh, that doesn't feel like a good web application. Now, running on both the server and in the browser, that means that you're going to have a great experience building components that will run in either location. That's important. As long as you're referring to things a little bit abstractly, you're not directly coupling to things that live behind the firewall that your web server has access to, and that folks that run in the browser don't have direct access to. You're going to be able to build Blazor components that connect and work with all kinds of data, all kinds of interactions for your viewers, your web page visitors easily. Now, Razor templates with C# interwoven, compiled, deliver content. We've seen this before. If you've done ASP.NET MVC, ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET Razor pages, you know how that works. And all of that typically works here in Blazor. Of course, install the .NET SDK, build your first app with the simple command, .NET new Blazor WASM. And in fact, let me bring up my console here, and we can take a look. I can fire up a command here real quick. I'm going to jump. Actually, let's just open a new tab. And let's call this test Philly.net. If I drop into test Philly.net, there we go. .NET new. There's actually a couple of Blazor projects here that you can use. There's Blazor Server App and there's Blazor WebAssembly. These are the two primary ones that you use. When you use Blazor WebAssembly, everything gets shipped down and run in the browser. When you do Blazor Server, everything runs on the server and it sets up a SignalR connection. We call it a channel that will connect from the server to the browsers that are connecting in and allow data to flow back and forth across that. And all the rendering of the components happens on the server. It ships back just the updates to the user interface. This feels a lot like when we used to do things like Ajax panels back in the day, right? Update a little bit of code, send just that block, that square of information that was on screen back to the server, update it, and send back just the updates to paint in that square of user interface in the browser. So pretty simple idea, pretty easy to think through and see the difference between the two. The other project that we're going to talk about today is this one, the Razor class library. We're going to get into this one, and we're going to, a little bit later on, show you how you can distribute components that you build. So, of course, if we build our first project here, .NET new Blazor WASM, right? Sure, we'll just leave it here in this folder. It generates and it writes some content here on disk. And when we look at this, right? It's our typical first application that we're used to seeing from ASP.NET, right? So I'll just open up a browser and go to, let me grab it and bring it over here. There we go. Right, it gives us this type of website. We've seen this with the counter and the fetch data. Now I want to focus on the fetch data page here because there's a lot going on this page that we should simplify. We should take this table presentation and let's start reusing this, because there's all kinds of places that, gosh, we could really benefit from having a table that we can interact with and reuse in different places throughout our applications. So let's do that. Let's go through that a little bit and see what we can do to improve our experience. So I'm going to cancel this. I actually have, and you saw, I have a demo built over here. I'm going to .NetWatch Run this. Now, it helps if I'm in one of my folders here. There we go. .NetWatch Run. Now, this shows a little bit of our new Blazor development experience, where it's actually going to pop open my browser, attached to that with SignalR, and as the files change on disk, it will reload my page automatically. So we're going to work in the fetch data over here. We're going to simplify this a little bit and make it more reusable throughout the course of our talk here today. Now, I have that code open over here. There's our fetch data, and we're used to seeing this, right? This is pretty garden variety Razor and Blazor markup. It's a table with a for each statement that goes across a collection of objects, in this case, weather forecasts. For the purposes of this discussion, I don't care that it's coming from somewhere else over here. We've got a collection of data. We're just doing a quick for each to paint information on screen. Easy. That's something we can get behind, we can understand. So if we want to start building towards effectively a grid component, how do we do that? How do we start thinking through this and then make it discoverable, reusable, and provide some cool user interface capabilities for other folks, so we don't have to always have a simple HTML table everywhere? Let's go through and let's talk more about that. So there's the source code we were already talking about. I put it here just in case we needed to get to it. So let's look at that source code, and we repeat these TD tags here. And if we ever wanted to change the presentation of this weather forecast, if we wanted to do something besides an HTML table, if we wanted to do list items or a definition list, a DL tag, right? DL with DT and DD tags. How do we change that? How do we redeploy this, right? And abstractly be able to generate that so that we can have cool other layouts. So I want to generically just do this simple removal of the TD tag. So let's do that as our first demo. Let's remove this tag. Well, this is actually going to seem a little bit strange. We're going to build a component that replaces a simple tag with something that's actually a lot longer. What I like to do is I like to build a folder here called components. You'll see that's a little bit of a standard practice that a lot of folks will use. So if I build a components folder here, I can add a Blazor component, which is a Razor component. And I'm going to call this table cell. Okay, so I have a table cell component, and I can put content inside table cells instead of using fetch data over here. In fact, it already knows what a table cell is. See, it's already popping up there in my IntelliSense. Now it's sitting in Fritz components demo, Blazor components, table cell. I can shorten that so that I don't have to have the full namespace for that by just appropriately adding an entry here into imports. So we'll add that real quick. Components. And now I can make this. I can still leave it the full length, right? The full tag name there. But I can shorten it down so it's just table cell now. And that's acceptable. I have some content that I want to put inside of that. No big deal. We can receive we can receive information that we want to work with on our components using a parameter tag. So if we put a parameter attribute on a property, and let's receive a string on this, and it'll be some content, and we're going to end up formatting that tag as just a TD, and we'll output our content like that. Take whatever string content was passed to us and just put it between these two tags. So I can come back over here and I can say content, and IntelliSense now is telling me what my attributes are here, and I can just start lobbing these into that location. Not bad. It's not a great feature yet, but we're delivering something, right? We're moving in the right direction. So let me replace these with content equals, right? And I'm just going to Alt down select. Nuts. I wanted all of this, and I will just, there we go. You know what? I'm going to end up typing in there. That's fine. Equals quote, and we'll close these off. All right. So now I've got this information, and oh gosh, these are, right? These are integers. We need to convert those to strings. Now I've got table cells. And if I take a look back over here, you'll see this is rebuilding for me, and it's also reloading my user interface. And it looks the same now, but I've abstracted away the concept of a table cell. I'm starting to hide some of my user interface logic, some of what I'm building behind some components, so that as I work with my actual weather forecast presentation, now it's getting a little bit simpler in the sense that I've abstracted things away. I don't need to have the actual definition of what these look like, what these table cells look like as I go and build and work further. Now, content like this, I'm going to run into some issues here, right? It really felt better when that content, the stuff that's going to appear inside my table cell, was inside the tags. Putting it here on a parameter feels weird. And if I wanted to put some style on this, right? Right, if I want to do something like this, well, that's not going to flow through to my content. It doesn't know what to do with that style tag, right? And we get it blowing up here, right? Gosh, I'd really like to be able to put a style tag on my component and let it still be used. How do we do that? Let me go back to the slides. Let's talk about the next feature around building components that we want to talk about. This is called attribute splatting. It sounds weird, but right when you think about a star, an asterisk character, right? The Shift 8 on our keyboard, right? It looks kind of like a splat, like you smacked a bug and it splatted, right? So we're gonna take that wildcard and we're gonna splat. We're gonna blow out. Here's all the attributes that you put into your code, into your markup, that we want to make sure are available out there on the child component. So we can add another parameter that receives a dictionary of type string and object that'll capture the other attributes, and we provide to the parameter attribute the capture unmatched values equals true argument. So anything that the component doesn't know about, doesn't have a parameter defined for, we're going to capture and stash in this dictionary. We can then use the @attributes tag attribute. That sounds so weird. And to say, well, write these other attributes out here. This way you can go and redefine. You can go and take anything that you want to inspect out of that other attributes dictionary, act on it in some way, interpret if you need to, and take whatever actions you want. But I named this other attributes. This property can be whatever name you would like. I like calling it other attributes because it's the other things. Okay, so I can do that to carry along that style attribute on my table cell tag and make that appear inside my content, my rendered content. Now, the other thing that I mentioned about having the content as an attribute on the table cell, that feels weird. We can move that into our child content, receive that when it exists inside my table cell tags by using the child content parameter. Now, this is a standard name and format. This is a convention that if you use this with how you define your component, it's a parameter with a property of type render fragment that receives, that is named child content. This is a standard name. You cannot change this. If you define this property, anything that exists within your tags of your component will be made available as a render fragment inside of your component. So you can then take that content, drop it wherever you'd like by just using the @child content markup inside of your component. So let's take this little bit of learning now and upgrade the table cell component and apply that and see how that enhances things. So I'm going to go back over to my code. I'm going to leave this style tag here, but I'm going to get rid of this content bit here and handle instead the child content. So let's go back over to my table cell, and I'm going to rename this from content to child content. And this is a render fragment. Now, right, a render fragment, that sounds kind of complex. Like there's something more going on here. A render fragment is actually a delegate, and it captures, it receives the rendering information for what's inside the tags. You don't actually have to execute it, but you just place that reference and it will use it and put your content right there. Let me put that other parameter out here. And there it is, capture unmatched values, true. And this is going to be a property. It's a dictionary of type string and objects, object values, right? The values of our attributes. And we'll call this other attributes, right? I can call this foo, it doesn't matter. But I like to call it other attributes just so I know what it is and where I'm placing it. So I can add here and it's already popping up there, @attributes equals other attributes. So the things that my component doesn't understand are stashed in this dictionary, and they're going to be rendered, just tacked onto my table definition here. So I've already saved that. This is actually going to crash. It actually it worked just fine there, because check this out. It's not actually going to have content being output. See this? It doesn't know what to do. Table cell does not have a matching property name. Now, why didn't that? It should have picked that up. Let me go back over here to this. That should have gotten picked up, but content doesn't exist either. It should have run just fine for me there. If not, I have a saved sample I can go back to. There we go. That's what I was expecting. It didn't actually output anything because look at that. It actually output the style and the content as a content attribute because it doesn't know what to do with this. So let me go back over to my code. I'm going to take those content attributes out here and just close the tag right there. We'll reformat this. And I will pull my little alt drag trick here and output those. Save, let this reload. You'll see the console. It should be reloading. It looks like it reloaded. There it is. And now my first column is all bold. Right, there we go. Okay. So we're back to where we were originally with having table cells. But when I start when I start looking at this and I want to have standard features that I want to deploy inside of my table cell, I can do some new things. I can start to get a little bit fancier. I can force certain things into play here as I go and roll out my table cells. I don't see any questions yet. How we doing there, chat room? Doing all right? I'm going to keep moving on then. So we're gonna enhance. We're gonna go even a little bit further here in upgrading our table cell by allowing us to get rid of those rows, right? We've got this for loop here that happens inside of fetch data, right? This for loop is something that I can hide even further. I don't want to necessarily have a for loop here. I don't want to have to go through and manage that. I may even get into virtualization at some point, and I want to hand that off, how that's rendered, how that's placed on screen, make that available somewhere else. I don't need to have it right here. So we can start integrating with something called a render fragment of type T. Now this creates templated components. We're going to define a section of HTML outside of our component that we want rendered by the component. So we define that type of T, that generic type of T. We use this type param T directive to indicate that type. And we can use that then to grab whatever context object is made available to us and place it inside of our component so that it renders and does something, it interacts with that template appropriately for us. So let's go back over and let's introduce now to our table cell. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to turn this into its own. I'm trying to remember my demo. I'm going to turn this into its own grid component at this point. So if I remember correctly, I added a new component here, and I called this a SuperTable because it's more than just a table. And right, I'm going to define this as a table with a T head, and it's got a TR with some THs. I don't know what they are yet. And I'm going to have a table body, and I'm going to have some collection of items that I need to loop over here. So let's define that property. Right, so I'll create a parameter here. This is a property, and I want to receive some IEnumerable collection of type, I don't know, I'll call it T item, and I'll call this items. Now I need to have a type parameter for that. So I'll have a type param directive, and I'll call it T item here. T item, there we go. And this will now match up with that, and there we go. So I'll be able to iterate over these items and do something with them. So I could say for each item in items, and I'm effectively going to end up outputting, rendering whatever's in this fragment, this template that I want to receive here. So what's that template look like? Well, the template is just another parameter. So we'll define another parameter. It's a property, and it's like we saw in the table cell. We had a render fragment that we captured. We'll have now render fragment of type T item, because we're going to receive some data item that we're going to apply this template to. So I'll call this a row template. So far, so good. All right. Now, all I have to do here then is say at row template, and I pass into, you see, I'm calling this like a method, and I pass in a T item, which is going to be an item. Now, this feels almost too easy, right? I haven't added significant value here to what this thing is doing. And I also need to define what my headers look like. So maybe we receive what the headers, right, what that looks like. Maybe that's another parameter. And let's receive that as a string array. And let's call this header text. Okay. So now I've defined this grid. I should change this so there's a for each over those, right? Let's call this in header text, and I'm just going to output like that. So I have all the logic to present my table now here, and I can go back over to fetch data, and I can replace this entire thing with my now SuperTable. So I can define SuperTable, and it has, what do we call it? Row templates. There we go, row template. And my row template, it's going to receive this item, right? It's going to receive a forecast. So let me grab this, and I'm just going to Alt up and move it right in there. Okay. But my table, my SuperTable component doesn't know what a forecast is. So what you do is you can either change this to the word context, which is the default name for whatever the object is, or you can tell it, well, the context, the item that we're passing through, you can add as an attribute up here, and it's a, come on, Fritz, spell that right, forecast. Okay, we're getting somewhere. I still need to give it the forecasts as the collection, the items that we're going to be operating on. So I'll call this, right, forecasts. There they are. So there's my collection of forecasts. And actually, I should have shown you this. When I put the context is forecast here, I can now get IntelliSense on the object inside of my template. It knows what this forecast object is. That's pretty cool, right? That means that as a developer who's consuming this component, that's really easy for me to work with. I still need to get these headers somewhere. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cheat a little bit. Let me take these. I'm going to get rid of all this cruft that we don't need now. And let's take these and turn these into a string array. And I'll call them that, yeah, I'll call that headers, right? That works. So I've got date, temp in Celsius, temp in, not temple, and summary. Okay. I can get rid of these, and I can still use header text equals headers. Now, something interesting about, all right, we're going to be all right there. I like to put the @ sign in front here so that you kind of force this to C#. If you don't put it there, sometimes it interprets it as a string. So I've effectively now replaced, and we're going to rebuild here, my table with a component that does the same formatting, and there it is. Now, from our original table, this actually received a class of type table for Bootstrap. So I can go back over here, and I can ensure that every time I output a table, it has a Bootstrap class of table. This will refresh because it sees that change in my component. This will refresh because it sees that change in my component. You add new files, it doesn't always see the update right away when you run .NetWatch. There it goes. And back over, and now it's formatted properly. Now, okay, we've got something happening here. We're moving along. We're reaching into someplace that's kind of interesting, right? But we've got this standard layout that we've been deploying for our table. I want to do more with that. I want to get a little bit further into this and kind of apply some standard look and feel, some standard features to these that we can always use inside of our SuperTable component. Give me 1 second here. I'm just going to roll over and take a quick look. Make sure that I've hit everything I wanted to in this part of the demo. This one. Yeah, we're good. That's as far as I wanted to go on the component at this point, right? Yeah. Now, I can put some cool stuff on this last table cell, right? Let me add some definition here just to kind of force it to always be the same. And right, I can say let's do background color just to show you that this is still being passed through. Background color black. Color, I like lime, so it kind of looks like it's a terminal. And let's say font weight bold. Right? And let me also add to the table cell, let me add a width property here. So that it's clear how we manage, how we interact with that. So public int width get sets. There we go. And I'll just put up here to kind of make sure that this is always available width. Go back over here and force this by saying width equals 300. And we'll wait a second for that to rebuild. And come on, that should have restarted for me. There we go. And now I've got this cool look that always appears the same way, being defined outside of my component, but being injected in on how this looks. Let me pause here for a couple questions. First question I see here is from Richard, asking, what does the command .NetWatch Run do? Good question. Let me stop this. I jumped through that pretty quickly. Let me clear here. The command line .NetWatch says watch the files on disk, and when they change, rerun the verb that I specify after this. So I can say .NetWatch build, and it'll rebuild every time there's a change to one of the files. Now it's one of the files that it's already monitoring. And that's kind of what I've tripped over here a little bit in the demo so far is I've added files into the project. Until .NetWatch restarts because of those new files, it doesn't see and monitor their existence. And specifying run after that means anytime there's a change in my code, rerun the application, rebuild and rerun it. So let me close this one. And one of the new features that we rolled out in .NET 5 is this ability. I don't see the link happening here. There should be a thing that pops up here that says, there it is, .NetWatch reload socket connected. There's a SignalR client that's sitting over here that is listening for changes on disk, and when it sees a change, when it finishes rebuilding, it pushes a reload command into this page and forces the page to reload after it's done building. So if I come back over here and if I change that width, let me just make it simple, 350, file changes detected, waiting for application to rebuild. There it is, it finished rebuilding, it refreshed the page, and I now have my appropriate width on these 350 being deployed. So there's things happening here that allow you to have a better development experience. Thank you so much for the question, Richard. Really appreciate it. Let me check that off with a thumb so I can know to come back to that. Madagama asks, can we hook up client-side events and triggers like sorting? Yes. You can specify, and I didn't want to get down into events on this session, but I can certainly show you that. You can specify events inside of your components called event callbacks, right? So I can say event callback, and I can even specify an object type that I want to return. But for the purposes of this, I'll just list it here, and I can call this, let's say, header click. And up here in my th, I can add an on click and specify and pass back. I'm going to pass an action that says, what did I call it there? Header click, right? Header click. And it will raise whatever that method was that happened over there. It will execute it, what was passed in, and make that available. No, it's header click. There it is, invoke async. All right. So if there was a method passed in, you don't even have to do a null check here. It handles the delegate appropriately, and it will pass that event call back to whatever the parent object is and let you know that, hey, this thing was clicked. Now, to go a little bit further into your question of client-side events, you can certainly wire up and place a JavaScript on click here, handle that appropriately, and raise information back and do the sorting inside of this component. That gets a little bit more complex, can be done. There's absolutely, you can wire up JavaScript events inside of here. So all of that is hidden from the consumer of this over here on the fetch data page. Right? So definitely things that are possible. So thank you for the question. Is that Natch asks, is WebAssembly running in a browser multi-threaded, or is it single-threaded like a JavaScript running in a browser? It's multi-threaded. It's multi-threaded running in the browser. It is running in the sandbox. It is running asynchronously when you do make asynchronous calls. When you do make calls with an await statement, like right here, it is behaving as you would expect. So this does give us some capabilities to have some tasks running in the background and have them call back. You're never going to be able to really get full multi-threading and use up a ton of threads. You are going to be sandboxed. You are being controlled by the runtime that happens inside the browser. You have more flexibility than if you were in JavaScript, but you're still under the thumb of the browser. So thank you for the question. Hey, Jay. Jay has a question for us. .NET MVC has similar capabilities with the Razor display templates, editor template conventions. Yes, it does. And we're just moving those forward here into Blazor. When would I recommend an MVC project type versus a Blazor project type, or vice versa? Good question. When do we go and say, let's migrate from an MVC project to a Blazor project? Nothing says you have to use one over the other. Nothing says that one is going to be better than the other. I would consider moving to Blazor if you want to have the app run as a single page application in the browser. If you want to deliver a bunch of DLLs that live and get cached on a phone, on a tablet, on a mobile device, that don't always have to go back and get new versions from the server. If you look at how this has been running, and we take a look at storage, you'll see in the cache storage here, all of my Blazor resources, all of my DLLs have been downloaded and they're sitting here in the browser. So while I'm in development mode, these are being refreshed every time. But when you publish, it downloads them once, checks this SHA-256 on the end of the file name to make sure that they match the version that it expects. And it will either download a new version or continue working with the current version that it has and doesn't have to worry about doing a reload there. So I'm getting in the mindset of, let's migrate our applications to Blazor, even if they run as Blazor server, because we can reuse our Razor components back and forth between MVC and Blazor. And when you need that rich client interaction, you want that fast interaction, well, you've already got components ready. Just turn them into a Blazor application, and you can host a Blazor application on top of MVC. Now we actually will do rendering on the server for that first request and be able to interact with the DLLs after. So I think it's a good migration process that moves forward, and you're able to use and take advantage of the new technologies, WebAssembly, when you want that great single-page application responsiveness and interaction. Is that Mark Ziss asks, what is the debug tool I'm using? It doesn't like dev mode in Chrome or Edge. So I'm in Firefox here, and the dev tool for Edge it works in the Chromium-based browsers. So the new Microsoft Edge and Chrome it works in. I'm gonna need to go back to my demos here if I want to wrap up on time. So let me open Chrome. Let me open Edge here, and if I paste in to go to my application, it's downloading, loading, and there I am running. And I don't really have, right, when I look at my debug here, my content, there's my CSS. If I look at the fetch page, I'm just getting this loading tag. I'm not actually getting the content of my application. So what you can do, if you click over here, it says debugging hotkey, Shift-Alt-D when application has focus. So Shift-Alt, and you're going to see Karnak report that I clicked it up here. Shift-Alt-D, and it's going to try and go into, why is that opening? Right up here, Shift-Alt-D, and it's going to try and open this in debug mode, and it's going to come back and tell me, oh, you can't do that. You're not in a debug-enabled instance of the browser. So it says here, press WinR, and here's the command to reload, and if you're in Chrome, here's the command. Fine. This is only available in debug mode when you're running locally in development mode. So that just reopened, and now I've got a version of Edge that's opened to this. If I hit F12, see, now it's even moved over here because I've got even more content that we can work with. And if I click down into fetch data, it's now showing same information. That's not right. Let me open it one more time, Shift-Alt-D, because it's not actually hooked up to the .NET debugger is what's happening. Now, if I pull this out and I look at my debugger side by side, let me move it over here. And how do I want to do this? I'm dealing with a sizing issue here. Bring it there so you can see that. I'm on a really wide screen. So it's kind of showing me what's being done over here. But now when I look at fetch data, look at this, right? Can I pop that out? Where's the pop out button? One second here. I don't see the pop out. No matter. As I interact with that, now I'm going to see the actual content of, it's down here, the actual content of my application, and I can see the actual razor of that, and I can put breakpoints in here and interact with it. So the debug tools inside the browser work really nice. So let me finish up talking about the next topic. So I'm carrying through a little bit of style here and forcing the style from outside. But what if I have a standard look and feel or some JavaScript that I want to force on these that happen that's available every time I use this? I see another question from Richard. Can I do .NetWatch Run in Visual Studio? If you do, if you run the application without the debugger attached, you get the same experience. Is there a reason to use Blazor versus Angular React except for .NET skills? Right now, it would be for the .NET skills. Angular and React have been around for 10 plus years. So you're comparing a framework that's 1 year old to a framework that's been 10 years old, out there, mature, and used a lot of different places. It's catching up quickly. The tooling for Angular and React is, right, you end up fighting with the JavaScript standards. You end up fighting with the creeping of how that grows and evolves. So it takes a little bit more time to get in and see that reflect and update in the tools. So It just takes a little bit more time to get used to it. Let me check out and show you the CSS as the next demo here. Check out 5. There we go. Yes, I know. Let me jump to that demo. Thank you. Are you kidding? I know. I thought we got rid of those. I'm just going to delete them. Yeah. Remove item Fritz component demo Blazor. Yes. All. Give me the latest version. There we go. So I want to talk about CSS isolation and JavaScript isolation. So if you have some common JavaScript, there was a question about sorting you wanted to apply, or a common style that you want to apply. If you create files with the name, whatever that component name is, .razor.css or .razor.js, you can add files in that are only referenced when that component is used. So if we add that in, and this already has those added, inside of my components, I have SuperTable. You see SuperTable Razor CSS. And this CSS, the nth child of table rows, we're going to make the background color navy. The color, we'll make it white. Otherwise, if it's an odd row, we'll make it light blue with white. And we'll make the header slate blue. This should have already, yep, it rebuilt for me. And now I get a standard look and feel that's always deployed when I use my SuperTable component. That CSS is included and referenced every time. And when I change that CSS, gosh, that light blue, maybe we should make this the color of the font. Make that dark. Let's make that navy. Even as the CSS changes, it will rebuild and reload here. And because it's a new file, to this instance of it running, I need to .NetWatch Run, and I'll get a new instance kicked off and attached here. Come on. There it is. And now it looks better. And I'll change that one more time just to show you that it does change every time. Let's make it black. So you'll see over here, it's building. And we'll get the redeploy in just a second. Ah, come on. It didn't reattach. Here it goes. There we go. So now it's black. So better experience of it reattaching and running and redeploying here. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. I want to make my SuperTable component now available to anybody in my organization. So what I can do is I can now move that out into a component library that we can deploy using NuGet and make it available for folks to include in their projects. So let me go back over here. I'm going to, I believe, let me reset that. And if I do this, oh, come on now. Right? Oh, we didn't commit the last demo. Bummer. We'll have to do it by hand. That's fine. So I can take this and I can move it down into a library. And this is a Razor component library. I created this with the Razor class lib, right? With the Razor class lib template over here. This one. This is the default content that it ships with, a dub root, and imports, a component, some JavaScript interop. I'm going to get rid of all this so that it's just going to be my table component. So I'm going to grab these 3 files and just bring them down here. I'm going to remove my components from up here. There we go. So now these are down here. I haven't changed anything in my contents of those files. They're just in a different location. I'm going to change this. The components doesn't exist anymore. So this is in the .lib project. And let's add a reference to it. Add project reference. There it is. And this should light up now. There we go. And back over here in fetch data, all of this, I'll change that back to a table cell because it knows what that is. And everything still looks the same. I'll go back over and just we'll restart this. .NetWatch Run. See, I'm a little worried about. Didn't I? What are we missing here? Imports Razor in lib does not exist. Yes, it does. Why you do this? Let's clean. Clean solution. Try that again. There, I'm feeling better about that already. There we go. And my component still works. Okay, that's great. And I can reuse it now in other locations, right? So I'm going to go back over to my index page, and right there's SuperTable, and I can provide an items collection. Right, let's put some code here, and let's create a private string of names equals new string. Who else do we have here? Msys, ntashv, Richard. There we go. That's enough to start. And I can say, oh, I called this collection equals names in my other version of this. Headers equals, and this will be a new string. And I'll just say name because there's only one element in here. Row template, sure. TR, table cell, and I'll just put context. Let that reload, go back to the home page here. You aren't going to reload for me. There we go. And they're output and they're formatted using my component that we've been building throughout the session here. So we've moved them out. They're now packaged. We can use those as a Razor class library, deploy it, and use it in other applications. Whether it's an MVC application like Jay was mentioning, you can invoke those components from MVC, and they can be used there. Used in a Razor server, used in Razor WebAssembly. That component library can now be reused in all these different places. The source code and all the contents, the slides for this are available on GitHub. Let me show you that. If you go to my GitHub, github.com /Fritz, there is Fritz Components demo. The source code is here. The slides are here. You can go through and take a look at what exactly we talked about here today. If you want to tinker with that and experiment with some of those very simple samples that we talked about, you can find me on Twitter, Twitch, GitHub, YouTube, /Fritz. You can find information. You can check out my live stream each week, 3 times a week, live.csharpfritz.com. Thank you so much. We're right at time. Really appreciate you tuning in and joining us for another Philly Code Camp. I'll stick around and keep an eye on chat for this session. If there's any questions, things you want to dig a little bit further on, this was really a 101 walkthrough on components. There's a lot more you can do with this. We didn't get into events. We didn't get into integrating with JavaScript. Those are just a little bit further down the line. And I have some much more complex components that I've built out there for a project called the Blazor Web Forms components. That's a series of components for Blazor that emulate the look and feel and the APIs of the original ASP.NET Web Form components. You're very welcome, friends. Thank you so much for tuning in.